Blood Ink by One-Shot-Cannon. I don't know how to start this off, or even if I should talk about it at all. This whole maelstrom of trauma, nightmares, and that goddamned face has really fucked up my mind for the past month. You have no idea what I put myself through, all for an easy steal of $500,000. That night replays inside my head, rent-free, and never stops. Ever. But since I'm bringing it up now, why not begin? For starters, I worked at this mom-and-pop corner store pharmacy in my now former northeastern hometown, which dated back to 1913, or something like that, for 10 years. The manager I was employed by was the founding couple's great-grandson, pretty much a dead ringer for his likewise great-grandfather. What I did there was backroom affairs, such as getting certain people their prescriptions, restocking snacks, lottery cards and collectibles at the checkout, and keeping tabs on the quantity of supplies and of said prescriptions. Whereas the cashier was some girl fresh out of college named Amina, and janitorial duty done by Doobie, bulky hillbilly-looking out-of-towner from, surprise, Florida. Now, before you go and picture it as this brick mini warehouse from 110 years ago, all run down and worn, the previous manager, my manager's father, has used his funds from many sales to restore the exterior of the store, as well as renovate the inside, as this allowed to have new features it never had in previous years, such as a restroom, for a plus. Locally, the store is very popular for the low prices of its myriad of products, but isn't the same outside of its stomping grounds. So service can be slow, and me, the manager, Amina, and Doobie would just have some banter about whatever was on our minds. The only time we've gotten involved in something outside of work routine was this bank robber somehow snuck in the back door that led to storage, and Amina, getting back onto her break, happened to bump into him. The douche decided to whip out his revolver at her, and as he did, wha-bam! Doobie grabs his wrist and gets him on his knees. As it turns out, the revolver was just a toy gun repainted to look realistic, and the bank robber himself was a dropout trying to use the stolen cash to impress his girlfriend. Safe to say, he got charged harshly, and Doobie got a lot of praise from the townsfolk. Alright, you've heard about my day life. Now you get ready for my nightlife. I'm not saying the pay is bad, as $25 an hour for 8 hours per day for 5 days per week is pretty solid. However, at the time, I was considering moving to a more suburban setting, since, even though my hometown is picturesque, not all of its inhabitants are of the lax type. I live, or used to live, in an apartment that is notorious for being a magnet for the most rambunctious and unhinged people I have ever, more often than not, heard and met in person. Whether it's a police raid or some dude's drug operation, or someone's losing their minds and begins to yell gibberish after gibberish, I was so sure that at one point some random tenant was going to bash through the walls and either beat the shit out of me or just kill me outright and steal my shit. Even though I make about $65,000 a year, sick pay included, the houses I was browsing for tended to be within the $150,000 to $250,000 range. And to make matters worse, a lot of people were quick to buy them fast. Fortunately, this is where my second job comes in. For you see, I am what some people call a thief for hire. Now, we should clarify that I don't do all the stealing, but rather I steal those items back that belong to their original owners. It all began in second grade when one of my friends, Ken, had his collection of trading cards stolen by the town bully, Bill, and, not wanting to have his life ruined, I hatched a plan to get his cards back in the most ninja way possible, Okay, I get it that breaking into Bill's house in the dead of night wearing all black is bordering on criminal charges, but at the same time, I knew how to cover my tracks really well, and the front door lock was a piece of junk. Topping it off, I thought Bill deserved it. Man, you should have seen his face the next day, as red as a beet, as his ill-gotten gain disappeared the night before. Like any superhero, I had to keep the talent of mine a secret from my parents, and it went from getting back stolen toys and cards to wallets, car keys, and some personal items by the end of high school. Go ahead and say that I am a modern-day Robin Hood, not Robin Hood. It fits me well. Anyways, after graduating from college, I decided to advertise my expertise to those who had been the victims of theft. If some lowlife stole your car, just give me the license plate and details, and she'll be back in your driveway in no time. Or if your purse got, well, purse-napped, I certainly know my ways around the turns, nooks and crannies of the town's alleyways. Our town was a maze, but at the same time, not so on the scale of Manhattan, which is why my many acts of counter-thievery were so successful. Usually, the price I have for any kind of Robin Hood hijinks was at $50. Well, not high in monetary gain, it did have its merits when I first started this nighttime career. If you hadn't guessed it, my job as a corner store employee was meant to add extra income, and even then, the yearly total was so short of the prices in the housing market. Sure, I could have asked my parents for some money to lend. The thing is, I come from a family of hard workers that don't accept charity, my dad being a long-distance trucker and my mum a librarian assistant. No calluses, no skills, is what my dad told me when I complained about having to fix the roof shingles with him. Harsh, but on point. God. If I had more than enough calluses, and, more importantly, foresight, of what I was about to get myself into that night, I would have called off my services there and then. For good. I'm certain it was the end of February, on a Saturday, so I was zoning out on the sofa watching back-to-back episodes of that old Flash Gordon cartoon, when I heard my doorbell ringing. Honestly, I jolted upright, not expecting anyone to visit, let alone someone in need of my services. At the time, there was a drought of people coming to me. Probably because I had effectively killed off theft in my time, so I was low-key hoping that I could get back into the action as I made my way to the door. Too eager to check the peephole, I opened the door, and outside was this young woman, no older than 24, light brown complexion and long black hair, who seemed to be holding back tears as best as she could. I knew instantly that something was troubling her, so, post haste, we went straight away to my kitchen to discuss what led her to me. To say it was business as usual was an understatement, as whenever this woman opened her mouth to speak, her lips started to quiver, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. Whatever happened to this woman must have been really bad, and, on instinct, I began to ask her of her needs from me. I was prepared for something along the lines of a stolen Fairly heirloom, a pet, or something else of sentimental value. But my face dropped at her response, and, dear God, it was an answer I never wanted to hear. My son, she sobbed, and then slowly but surely let everything out. That she and her son had fled their home country after her cop husband was killed not long after arresting the leader of an infamous cult. Having a hard time getting a job was proving to be torture for her mind. And to top it all off, she doesn't have the money to send her son to school. That's when she proceeded to explain that, in her own words, "It happened last week, when I was getting lunch ready while my boy was playing with his toys outside. Then I heard what sounded like him struggling, and I looked out the window and see a rusty sedan speeding down, and in the back. She began to cry, cupping her face in her hands, and I was taken aback by her story. My hometown has had its record of thefts, DUIs, and back alley brawls, yet a kidnapping was unheard of, let alone to happen to someone that had just moved in. There is nothing more upsetting about a kidnapping than when it puts a massive emphasis on the kid part of the crime. And sure, never stole back an infant. I was moved so badly by the woman's tale that I immediately vowed to do everything to bring him back safely. Remember that $500,000 I made a passing comment on? Well, it turns out she has a cousin of a famous actor who happens to live 2 states north, and she had told him of the incident. Fearing that going to the police might result in an ordeal similar to the one back in Taiwan, the actor suggested instead, of all people, me. Apparently my services are, or were, so popular that they must have made their way out of my former state. I don't even know how, but the woman said that he had connections in my town and was aware of my housing situation, so in exchange for getting his nephew back, he would pay me money that would allow me to buy 2 houses at once. Yes, they should be horrified that somehow a celebrity with enough moolah to buy half of Tennessee has knowledge about what I do in the night and my housing problems. But at the same time, how the holy shit could I turn down $500,000? For all that, I simply said, "Ma'am, I will do everything in my power to get your kid back in one piece, starting tomorrow." She was elated by my reply, thus giving me details about the car her kid was taken in, and had actually gotten the license plate. So I was above prepared to do some private eye DIY. Ironic, playing the role of an agent of law enforcement, while I have a mental track record of breaking and entering property, theft, and maybe leaving some less than kind words about the owner of said property. With all that said, she stood up, and whilst she had her voice cracking from sobbing, she said, "God bless you. Thank you. You are an angel." I showed her to the door, urging her to keep things between me and her secret, but not before she handed a photo of herself, just to show her son that I was sent by her. After she left, I began to spin my web on how to go on about this. My kit for my night job consisted of black clothing, including gloves, a ski mask, sweatshirt, sweatpants and sneakers, a small crowbar, a hammer, a diamond knife, night vision goggles, backpack, flashlight, and, in case of an emergency, pepper spray and a taser. Yes, a thief wielding 2 self-defense items and not a gun seems so contrary, so please hold your laughter. I never got caught during my nighttime career, and refuse to use violence whenever I can. Anyways, my boundaries aren't always accessible by foot, so I use my bike when it comes to those in far distance. It also has the added benefits of using alleyways in case my cover is blown. Not sure if I can carry a child on my back for that long of a time while biking. Finding this car was easy, to say the least, but on the other hand, I was left with a horrible case of the willies. As soon as I put the license plate number into the search engine of Auto Detective, it came back with the information of its owner, and, dear God, never in a million years would I imagine that a person with a bad rap would fall this low to commit a daylight kidnapping. This person is Evan O'Neill, an editorial cartoonist, or rather, a pariah of an editorial cartoonist. He used to work for an underground newspaper organisation that was notorious for its, putting it lightly, unhinged conspiracy-based news, usually with anti-government tangents and espousing tolerance and apathy and all that bullshit. Long story short, the founder of that paper had been arrested for money laundering and making IEDs and sentenced to a long-ass time in prison. Now, Evan O'Neill was a completely different can of worms. His cartoons were just disturbing, stereotypical caricatures of certain ethnic groups and members of the queer community, and was also a rabid traditionalist/fundamentalist when it came to art. In fact, the real nail in his career's coffin was that he had taken some strong shit drug and decided to barge into high school and harass a bunch of students in art class after he saw their anime-style doodles. Don't go picturing this guy being dragged out by one school security officer, because he was so goddamn high out of his mind, not 2, not 3, but 4 officers had to carry him out like he was a newly caught marlin. In addition for roughing up some teens for wearing fursuits to a furry convention and trying to set fire to an art festival, he got some very heavy charges handed to him, but he managed to escape out of prison just 2 days later. Unfortunately for him, the townsfolk, even the town ruffians, had enough of his bullshit, so they went about chasing him out of town with, I kid you not, baseball bats, golf clubs, and hockey sticks. All of this happened some 16 years ago, so you have to understand, it is a ballsy, if not shocking, move to come back to town where you're basically exiled from, and then have the audacity to commit a heinous crime. Now, with that tidbit out of the way, I came across an obvious problem. Where in this town was he hiding in? Initially, I thought about his house, but this was ruled out since it was burned to the ground by the angry mob after his escape. With that in mind, I deliberated on some other leads, such as the old middle school, the abandoned Kmart store, and even the local park, all of which led to the same answer. Filch. I was looking over the map of the town when I had an epiphany. In the form of this vast industrial park that doubled as a steel mill and oil well, which had shut down during the Great Depression, there were lots of places to hide in. Only the neighbourhood punks and vagrants usually congregate there, and alleged to be haunted by the ghosts of workers who died from accidents on site. It was good enough of a hunch that Evan might choose this particular area to hold the boy hostage, until he came up with some kind of ransom. Everything was all set and done. The industrial park was a 16-minute bike ride away from my apartment, and I had my gear on person to deal with Evan if it came to it. How so naive I was, having this gung-ho persona on me, like some kind of James Bond wannabe, not remotely aware of what I was about to face, hear, and smell. I still remember it all, despite trying to lose myself in booze and any kind of stimulant in a vain effort to forget. Those screams, that face, like something out of a horror movie, are stuck onto me like gum on my shoe. I will now tell you everything that happened on that goddamn night. No sugarcoating, no whitewashing, no watering down, all raw and unfiltered, as it all started at midnight. The entirety of this industrial park was closed off to the public, as it was revealed to have a high concentration of slag, byproducts, and other toxic materials. The town council's agenda was to first clean up all the waste that was left behind, then demolish the buildings, and finally build a nature reserve on top of it to aid the displaced wildlife. As such, the whole perimeter was previously guarded by chain-link fencing, but after one too many people cut through the fences or hopped over it, it was upgraded to a 10-foot concrete wall reinforced with titanium. Understandably, this had the effect of driving away all but the most tenacious urban explorers, graffiti artists, and homebodies. For me, though, I had one secret weapon up my sleeve: a grappling hook. Having caught it on the other side of the wall, I climbed upwards like Batman. You'd expect the place to have the usual security measures, such as barbed wire and CCTV cameras, and yet, as I made it to the top, there was none of that, which I felt the council never thought of including. From my understanding, the council thought the wall alone would have been enough to deter any would-be intruders, and here I was chuckling to myself that they didn't bother beefing up the security. Sliding my way down the wall, the scene was eerie, to say the least, keeping in mind that this was once a bustling centre of extracting oil, creating steel, and shipping either out to many companies that needed them. A good majority of the buildings had their concrete exteriors start to crumble and such, but otherwise it seemed stable for the moment. In some places, many windows were broken, doors fell off their hinges, a massive ton of graffiti, and what seemed to be earlier human habitation. Now, with climbing the wall past me, I had to figure out which building Evan and that kid were at, since it could be any building. Using my flashlight would be a dead giveaway, so I put on my night vision goggles and let the military hardware do all the work. Good Lord, as if the moonlight hadn't made the whole place unnerving, the goggles put on a new lens of dread, like I was in one of those quarantine movies. Suffice it to say that, even with my pepper spray and taser at hand, I was certain someone was going to try and jump me. I was not about to face the hospital bill if it came to that. I'd say I'd been walking around for an hour and a half, and I felt like I was going nowhere. Every corner I turned, I was hoping to see that rusty piece of shit, only to be greeted with just empty space, other than the occasional pile of rubble and garbage. The warehouses, furnaces, and mini oil field provided absolutely no leads, and I had yet to check any of the factories, those of which could offer a lot of hiding places. For some reason, I was not willing to throw in the towel, despite the rising frustration. Probably because a child's life was on the line. Then I had a thought, and I was really wanting to hit myself badly for not thinking of it sooner. The administration building. This building in particular was heavily developed in case of foreign investments and trades, further urbanisation, and whatever could have happened if the compound didn't close. Because of that, it stuck out like a sore thumb in terms of grandeur, at least. And it had many, many rooms that could be used to hide, oh, say, a stolen child. I made my way there, expecting to see the rust bucket sitting at the very front of the building. But when I got there, there's not even some loose pieces of concrete. I sighed, and, looking at either side of the building, had to go out on a leg and assumed it was in the back area. Sure enough, a few minutes of walking down the right side of that building, and bingo. That car and the license plates, just like the woman had said. I was taken aback by the car, in that it looked like the burned out hull of a Ford Pinto, infamous cars for exploding from the tiniest damage. It looked very cobbled together, with some scrap metal and rivets holding it together, and in some places welded, albeit very shittily. Yep, I said to myself. Really fucking creepy-ass car found. I turned towards what must have been the loading bay area, some of the shutter doors reduced to rustling tatters like old curtains. The whole place smelled awful. Rusting metal, exposed oil, and what must have been rotting meat lying about. Some punk must have left their lunch here as the walls were being built. Anyways, I swallowed any fear in me and marched into the building, armed with my night vision goggles and my tools. The inside was pure nightmare fuel. Broken down conveyor belts, rusting hydraulic hammers, cobwebs for feet in front of me, furniture strewn about, and some really old-looking documents after doing a good job collecting dust. Lively at one point, even with some freak accident at the corner waiting to cause grief involved. It was just as sad as it was haunting, knowing that some workers would have left this compound either alive or in boxes. I pressed on into the shadows, into what used to be the lobby, glancing at more machinery that had seen better days, almost stumbling on broken office desks and chairs, and even gave myself a scare after shifting some paper beneath my sneakers. You really do freak yourself out when it's just you, alone in the dark, not knowing what else lurks with you. I ascended to the second floor when, 4 floors down, I jumped at the sound of something falling over to my left. Fuck, I thought. Tonight's really gonna get ugly here, I'm sure of it. I peered into the room where the sound came from and was greeted by 2 glowing green eyes. I had my hand on my pepper spray until the pair of eyes came closer, and, to my relief, it was just a stray cat. My fear turned to relief instantly as the calico came closer to me. I squatted down to try to pet it, and, like switch turned on, the cat began to arch its back, fluff its tail, and began to hiss and growl at me. I stood up faster than a pneumatic umbrella, in shock of this sudden turn in behaviour, before the furball turned and bolted down the stairs. Yeah, in hindsight, that should have been a sign saying, "Get the fuck out if you want to live for tomorrow." Shook but determined, I proceeded onto the 3rd floor, now with adrenaline pumping non-stop. If the context was different, this would have been me doing some urban exploring, trudging through the past, if you will. There are many qualities that give abandoned buildings as much beauty as the fear they evoke, and it is when you step into one in person that you truly understand the appeal of otherwise hazardous structures. Imagining what it would be like to be the intended inhabitant of any building really has that sort of nostalgia running in your veins that you feel, but at the same time can't quite capture, especially if you were born after the building's abandonment. Likewise, the future generation of urban explorers will have this sensation felt as well, a repeating cycle of attaining something that is no longer there. The 3rd floor was definitely the place where some business conferences were held, whether to prepare for the rise and drop of prices in steel and oil, accounting, and workers' unions. It was very decorated, with Americana imagery plastered as murals, and the overarching motto that led to, most likely, the foreman's office saying, "Labour is measured by the sweat you make." Real classy, long-dead foreman, with your fancy-ass office and whatever crap you believe in. Snarky comment aside, I felt it necessary to check every room before going to the 4th floor, just to be certain there was nothing to be left out. God and his pearly kingdom, how I regretted being so thorough. If I only knew what was in the former foreman's office. Making sure that every room and cubicle was cleared, it was time to enter into the foreman's office. As I got closer to the door, a pungent, rotting smell wafted towards me, and let me tell you, it had the same odour as a shoddy meat locker. My eyes were watering from the stinging sensation of it, and I was certain I almost coughed out pieces of my lungs in a vain attempt to get fresh air, if any left. I could have called, and despite that, I kept pushing to know what lay beyond that door. May I never have it to see such imagery in person again, for it has haunted me since. The room was covered in bones. Not just bones, though, as it was littered with pieces of flesh and organs, too. Most of them human. I say most of them, as I found what looked like bones and carcasses of various animals, such as deer, dogs, turkeys, small birds, cats, rats, raccoons, opossums, skunks, pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, ducks, cows, and even fucking horses. The first sentence that came to my mind was, what the actual fuck? This hall had the hallmarks of a mass grave. Like, how many people and animals died here? Were they all killed here at the same time? As I stepped out of the room from sheer horror, I began to compose myself and decided that maybe they were killed elsewhere, and this room was just a goddamn trash can for the bits and pieces that couldn't be... I don't even want to know for what purpose. 10 minutes go by, and my nerves were never on high alert as they were at that moment. Like, for all I knew, I could have ended up in the lair of some whack-minded, fucked cult that was planning some really awful horseshit plot. At the time, I began to formulate my own hypothesis. Evan, that motherfucker, had fallen into some sick cult, kidnapped the boy as part of some initiation ritual to be... No, there's no way I'm going to let that kind of shit action happen. I just have to find the kid quick and get the hell out of Dodge. Not wanting to stay another second on that floor, I mustered up the courage and made my way to the 4th floor, now with every hair on my body on edge. This door, judging by its bland and generic appearance, might have been storage, particularly for office supplies or other related junk. Everything about it reeked of that same rotting smell in that office space, only it was juxtaposed with what I initially thought was copper or iron, and it almost made my nose numb from the overwhelming stench. The thing about this floor is that it was built to be compartmentalized, meaning it had huge sliding doors that created spaces for certain items, at least to my knowledge. This was definitely not an easy task, knowing the boy could be stashed somewhere, and I would have been none the wiser about it. I shifted those metal doors this way and that, going through sheets of paper and writing utensils that were never used to begin with. Even with my goggles, I was pretty much trying to find a needle in a haystack, and the last thing I needed to happen was to get caught by whatever cult was residing here. I had gone through pretty much a quarter of this floor when I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the 3rd floor. There was no greater feeling of immediate panic coursing through your veins, and I was doing my best to slide each door as silently as possible, hoping to land myself some shelter in this building from hell. As I did, I found one space that had enough room for me to hide in, and, just in time, as soon as I basically dove into that room, the footsteps sounded as if they had reached the top of the stairs. I hid under a desk and tried my best to keep my breathing low, but then again, you'd have a hard time trying that if you were being what amounted to being hunted by some crazed cultist. The footfalls were slow, almost as if whoever was out there was searching for something. or more accurately, someone like me. I pressed myself into the interior of the desk, of which, thankfully, had those panels that covered the back where someone's legs would be. I was praying silently to God to just make this creep go away. But as soon as I heard the sound of feet walking disappeared, I went from relief to horror with a thought. What if they were waiting outside? I braced myself for the worst to come. Probably being grabbed and dragged on the floor to be met with a knife, which never came to pass. Thank God. I gave about 5 minutes, I think, before crawling out of the desk and giving my legs some much-needed freedom. I slowly looked around the room, and my stare was drawn to this contraption, like something out of a Resident Evil movie. It resembled a metal harness, likely meant to restrain someone. It was armed with needles and tubes, and the top of it had this hook, most likely to hang whatever poor sap got this torture. The thought of someone being hooked up to that to have their, blood drained? Was sickening enough in my mind. I turned back to the desk, and that's when I spotted something I hadn't noticed. Probably because I was too panic-stricken to bat an eye. On the desk was a cartoon, albeit a gross representation that I will not give details here. But I guess out of morbid curiosity, I turned off my goggles, pulled out my flashlight, just to get a better look. There was something off about this cartoon. Not so much of its drawing style. It has to do with its colours, specifically the hue. It seemed very vibrant. Too vibrant, if I'm being honest. And more than that, it smelled like pennies fresh out of manufacturing. It then occurred to me that this drawing was made not too long ago. Perhaps half an hour or so. And whoever made it, stupid as it sounds, took a break. Maybe Evan was getting his new art shtick by kidnapping and torturing people as motivation, their screams acting as music to his ears. Literally. Just thinking that now is making me shiver horribly of how human beings could do monstrous things to one another for pleasure. I put down the wretched excuse of art and was about to bug out when I heard that same heavy, deliberate set of footsteps again. I was certain they were going to enter this room. They were going to be very thorough about searching for the intruder, that is me. Things went from bad to worse when I found out that the battery for my goggles were running low, so I had to use my flashlight, despite the high chance of drawing attention to me. I was frantically looking around for some means of escape when I shone my flashlight on a door, and it was a now or never moment for a split second. God, I was not prepared for what I was about to face behind that door. It made me very wary of people I don't know. But brace yourselves. It's gonna get messy. Practically gliding to that door, I mustered enough concentration to open it without as much noise as possible. Whoever was approaching me, a meter away or so. I hopped in, shut the door behind me, turned off my flashlight, and was enveloped in darkness. Do you know what it's like to be powerless in an environment you can't navigate by the naked eye alone, not having any knowledge of what you might bump into? That you might bump into something dangerous? All I could do was sit down and wait out whatever nightmare I set myself up for, if it was a nightmare at all. No sights, just the sounds of emptiness and the shuffling of feet on concrete, and items being moved about on the other side of the door. On this side, I heard chains swaying softly, like they were holding something heavy, as if whatever was being held were slabs of meat in a butcher shop. Meanwhile, that creep, Evan, whoever the fuck, seemed to be grunting in frustration over something, and I could not give a shit about it. Soon, suddenly as he entered, he exited, the sound of his footfalls marching down the stairs, giving me a small but much needed consolation in this ordeal. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 30, when I felt confident that he was distracted by search for whatever he needed. I stood up and gave out a small spasm when something brushed the top of my head, and feeling around was one of those old chain switches you see on old lamps. Not wanting to waste battery or make myself an easy target, I opted not to use my flashlight and pulled the chain switch to turn on the lights. Oh Lord, have I shone light on a scene from the deepest regions of hell, for in front of me were people and animals hung on chains. I thought at first that they were all dead, that Evan must have killed them, but upon further inspection, I came to the conclusion they were drugged, as I could tell they were still breathing, though barely. What they all had in common, though, were large puncture marks on their wrists, necks and stomachs, like they had been pierced by giant mosquitoes, draining their blood. At the time, I really believed that Evan had gone full vampire mode, snatching any people and stray animals he could get his hands on. But it seemed countered by those bones in the fireman's office. Like, it wasn't adding up to a T. My eyes darted around a fiendish art piece, and I glanced at the corner of this alcove to the right, and noticed someone chained to the wall by their left ankle, in a fetal position. I walked over to the curled up form, and it was this young boy, no older than 6 years. The same boy that belonged to the mother who sent me on this trip to hell in the first place. Obviously, I never asked on how to speak the language of their home country, so I tried my best to convince the boy that I was there to get him out. When words didn't work, I flashed the photo of his mother, and, thankfully, he put 2 and 2 together that I was here to bust him out. Not having the time to search for the key, I took out my crowbar and began to chip away at the rusty iron chain nearest to the shackle, which was brittle enough to not withstand modern-day steel. Clearly, all that kidnapping happened a week ago, so the boy wasn't in the best shape to stand up on his own, and I had to help him up. If only it was as easy to just leave that cursed room and into the night, were it not for Evan, who I was 100% certain is behind this, had returned. Though distant and muffled, I heard him walking back to his workshop of horrors, and without thinking, I turned off the lights, and me and the boy hid behind the wall that made the alcove. Not even 20 seconds later, we heard the door slide open, the lights turned on, and there was some noise of one of the people being unhooked, then dragged outside of this human meat locker, before the lights went out again. It was at this point I really began to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and I wished I hadn't. I had the nerve to peek out of the crack between the door and the wall, and it was a front row seat to the true horror of everything that the man called Evan O'Neill. He could even be called that anymore. What I saw was a tall, long-limbed, gaunt thing. The bones of his, or more accurately, its ribs, back and shoulders all taut, like it was emaciated for years, with claws for hands and feet, and long unkempt hair on the top of its head. It hoisted this middle-aged man onto the device, and as soon as he was in, the needles came down on him with such force that it woke him up screaming in pain. This monster then proceeded to turn a handle-like switch down, which started the machine, and began to drain this poor bastard every drop of blood in his body. It happened so fast, and despite that, the man was in his death throes, no doubt dying from tremendous blood loss. It must have been for over 10 minutes before the man gave his last breath and died on the spot. But the worst part was yet to come. For you see, the blood that was drained out of this man was deposited into this pen-like contraption. And this creature took it, was fiddling it a bit, and began to use it on his artwork. It all clicked then and there in that moment. The device, the people being kept in that one room, the all too vibrant nature of the picture, all to produce his idea of superior art, while literally draining the blood of those who had the misfortune of solely being in his sights. I watched for what must have been 45 minutes of him, whatever, adding details to the already disgusting caricature, some minute, and others glaringly obvious. When he had reached to his left, grabbed what seemed like food, and ate it. In that light, it was a human calf. Not bloody or fresh, as though it was preserved or pickled. And then I came to a disturbing notion. One that made it all the more nightmarish to behold. Evan first stalks his prey and captures it, drugs it so it's too weak to fight back, and continually drains its blood until the very last drop. When all the blood has been used up, Evan most likely proceeds to butcher the corpse, either giving it a salt or a pickling bath, and eats the meat like jerky. To encounter a cannibal is an already surreal and chilling experience. But to find one who is willing to use blood as an art medium, or pretty much anything inedible of a human body like ears, noses, hair, and bones, for that matter, screams depravity of the lowest kind. Hearing him chewing on a piece of what used to be a human being almost made me puke. And while I was focused on the grim spectacle, I knew the boy behind me was covering his ears and shutting his eyes in this appalling scene. Half an hour later, and Evan, seemingly satisfied with the work he had done, left the room to parts of the building unknown, which cued me and the boy to make a break for freedom. We quietly lurched down the staircase, past the third and second floors, until we reached the first without incident. I had to resort to using my flashlight, despite the risks it carried, to navigate the place without tripping over and getting badly hurt. I kept the boy in front of me, so he wouldn't be out of sight, while occasionally looking behind to ensure we weren't being followed in the dark. If my night vision goggles hadn't been on low battery power, I could have escaped as fast as I hoped. Of course, even the best hardware doesn't prepare you for a confrontation straight out of a horror movie. It was when we reached the lobby that I felt an impact hit my back, almost 2 inches away from breaking my neck, and fell face first to the floor. The boy sped off in a direction I know not where, and the silence was replaced with a deep, ragged breathing that was Pertway's hungry and angry. I turned around, and the flashlight still in hand, it shone on that thing, Evan. And God Almighty, that face. I still remember it down to the smallest of details. Nothing about his deceptively angelic face remained. Only instead was a mosaic of acne and scars, complemented by two bloodshot eyes, a sunken, shriveled nose, and an array of deformed but sharp fangs. Evidently, he was displaying the raw emotion of fury, combined with the death stare of a starving predator, all rolled into the premeditation of killing me for having the gall of stealing his food. He proceeded to raise his hand, open palm, in what I believed he was going to slam my head into the floor. But I was very quick with mine, pulling out the pepper spray and letting him have it. The sound he let out was like a blend of a mountain lion, fox, and Tasmanian devil, only sound enough to have split the night in two, and it was as furious in its tone. He cupped his hands over his face as he began to convulse from the spray, giving me time to get back on my feet and find out where the boy went. But not even 3 steps in, and the bastard got me by the ankle and nearly tripped me. Fucker wasn't going to let me go without throwing hands, or in this case, claws. As I struggled to get his grip off of me, my shit fell out of my backpack, scattering it everywhere. I tried using my now emptied backpack to smack against his head. That didn't do jack shit, like he wasn't even aware of it. I eventually lost my balance, and now it was his turn to tower over me, this time raising a foot to stomp on me. I closed my eyes to brace for the impact, knowing in that moment that it was over for me. But no sooner had I just done that, when I heard him screech again and fall over, causing me to instinctively open my eyes and see what was happening. As it turned out, that boy grabbed my crowbar that had flown out of my backpack and was now using it to beat the hell out of him. It was at the 8 beating that Evan grabbed the crowbar out of the boy's hand and threw it behind him, and then grabbed the boy by his neck. I wasted no time in trying to find whatever item I could use to distract him or divert his attention to me, and thankfully, I found my ace in the hole. 1 second, Evan was all cockily gripping the boy in his clawed hand, and in the next, he was shaking violently as I shoved my taser into his side. I shocked him long enough to let the boy go, and fell over once again, taser still at it. However, it was one rogue spark that landed on the face, still covered in pepper spray, that saved me and the boy, for when the heat of the spark reacted with the surprisingly flammable chemical in the spray, Evan was engulfed in flames. The pain of being immolated was so great that he began to flail about, spreading the fire to all the wooden desks and paper everywhere, accompanied by his horrible, ear-splitting shrieking. He went further into the deep interior of the building, a burning ghost, never to be seen again. Me and the boy made our escape at the loading bay area door, and we ran as fast as we could to the wall I had climbed over. Still, the boy was only able to get half a yard in before he dropped to his knees, weak from his imprisonment, and I had to carry him the rest of the way, far away from this horror show. As we reached the rope I descended from, I made sure he was clinging tightly to me. I made my ascent. As I got to the top of the wall, I saw a great portion of the administration building on fire, with smoke reaching up to the stars. I didn't want to stay longer than I already did, so I shimmied down the rope to where my bike was and got on it. For once, having to carry a heavy backpack to school proved to help my balance in the long run. That boy was now sound asleep on the way to my apartment. As soon as we got there, I simply collapsed onto my bed and fell asleep myself, wanting to get over this hell night as soon as possible. I've gotten me and the boy out of that building. Not the building out of me. As I had horrible nightmares of seeing those people screaming in pain, whilst Evan grimaced a hideous smile and ate their human flesh. I was never more than happy to see the rays of morning sun enter my room. I made the boy some toast, as to get his strength back, and called the mother to let her know that the deed had been done. The first thing I saw on TV as I turned it on, a fire in the abandoned industrial park. The reporter was in front of the charred-out building, saying along the lines of, "The extent of the damage of last night's fire has been revealed to be very harsh, with authorities stating that it has made this already unstable building even more dangerous." I thought nothing else, other than what I had already been cursed to know, until the reporter followed up with, "However, it seems that this case of arson has developed into a full-blown murder investigation, with firefighters and now police discovering a makeshift torture workshop of sorts, complete with corpses of people and animals that have gone missing in various counties." I almost dropped the coffee in my hand, and as I turned around, the boy had the same horrified expression as I did. Come afternoon, the woman knocked on my door, and the second I opened the door wide enough for her to enter, she went directly to her son, and they hugged each other tightly, tears brimming. Yes, I am pretty sure that boy is traumatized as much as I am. But at the same time, seeing mother and son reunited, it emboldened my sense of humanity. As promised, she gave me the $500,000, and her and her son's thanks, now that the boy needn't have to come back in a box. This is the part where I have my happily ever after, living a quiet life in a rural suburb, free from the hustle and bustle of the city. The thing is, it wasn't the end. At least during my last days at the apartment complex. And you'll learn why. It was 3 days after the incident, on a night when I was boxing my stuff for the move, and I heard tapping on my window. For some reason, I was awash with apprehension, and pressed myself against the wall panel to said window. I was careful to peek around without exposing too much of myself. And Lord help me, it was fucking him on the fire escape. The way he was burned made him even more horrifying, like some deranged version of Freddy goddamn Krueger. And holy shit, it takes a lot to get my heart pumping like it did that night. I was awestruck, terrified, paralysed. Couldn't believe that he survived the fire. And I never thought anyone would go out of their way, despite such injuries, to be active, let alone hunt me down. I stood as motionless as possible, even though it looked like he didn't see me, just staring off into space. You bet your ass I moved out of the way as soon as he turned his eyes, then his head to where I was, and waited for a long moment until I was sure he had left. For the rest of the month, I was checking over my shoulder when I was at work, at my usual watering hole, even when doing grocery shopping, so paranoid that he would get me at the right time. Oh, I did see that son of a bitch from time to time, but I figured that a daylight attack was out of the question, preferring to do so at night. Fortunately, my shifts being a 9 to 5, and some measure of daylight that worked as a deterrent for the time being, as with most of my daily errands. Regardless, every day was a matter of whether I would live, or to get snatched and then probably disemboweled, torn to ribbons, eaten alive, or a number of scenarios. The day when I finally began to move out was when I gave my boss a heads up about me moving out of town. I was so grateful for his understanding, and he and my former co-workers wished me luck with my new home, and hoped to see me again as soon as I got everything sorted out. I took one last look at my hometown, knowing now that I would never return as long as that thing, Evan, was still alive. For all I know, he was carrying out more of his wretched harvest of people that few would have missed for their own blood. It was an hour and a half drive to my new house, an airplane bungalow, furnished with a kitchen and basement to boot. As all my furniture and other belongings were placed inside, I was praying in my mind that that thing didn't follow me here, that he would forget about me, and hopefully the police would be the one to deal the killing blow to him. Out of sight, out of mind, I thought to myself, as I sat on my couch, staring up at the unpainted ceiling. It should have been the case, but it never came to be such. It was a week later that I heard my front doorknob being jiggled, and it was evident that he had stalked me. The next morning, I decided to get my handgun as self-defense, and more importantly, as a last resort. No way I was going to be taken unaware by him in any given opportunity at night. I've also made the choice to get reinforced windows and doors, security cameras, an alarm system, and a panic room built in the wall of the basement. John Hammond said it best: spared no expense. The nights that followed, characterised by doorknob fiddling and window tapping, were utter torment in my mind. So much so, I refused to leave my house. The reason why I am sharing this story is because Evan has finally broken in through the attic, and triggering the alarm, I took my gun and snuck into the panic room. The door of the panic room is diamond-infused titanium, strong enough to withstand a nuclear blast, but even that might not do shit when it comes to some kind of vengeful ghoul thing. I don't know what to do, other than to wait for the police to arrive and just shoot the fuck out of the devil. And I'm having a mini panic attack, on the verge of going insane. I just have to prepare for the moment when he manages to get through that door and do to me what he does worst. This might be my last message to the wider world, and chances are I have to be the one to kill him. I hear him crawling down the stairs leading to the basement. My gun is loaded, 9mm hollow point, facing the door, right now under siege by claws and pure animalistic rage. I just need the right moment to make the shot. Wish me luck. I don't give an update. I'm dead is